Hello there, everybody. Great to see you all. There's been lots of interest in today's event. There's a very popular one. I think Gilly's probably popular, and it probably tells you that there's a lot of trauma around, or maybe interesting trauma. I'm not quite sure which, but anyway, it's great to see so many of you here. And our presentation today is Adoption, Trauma and the Body. And Gillian Bruce is going to be speaking about that in just a second. I think many of you probably have come across Gillian before. She's an adoptee, she's a counsellor, she's a trainer. She's done a lot of work with How to Be Adopted and with PAC-UK and other organisations. And she has developed with us some adoption counselling training, which we're going to start delivering next month, aren't we? And we're very excited about that. So she's an all-round super person. If you wouldn't mind during if it hasn't been muted during the presentation, if you wouldn't mind just muting yourself, that would be just great. The chat will be open and I'm going to be monitoring the chat during that time. And if we've got, and there is a bit of an if attached to this, if we've got some time at the end, then any prominent themes I'll feed back to Gilly and ask her about them. We'll see how we get on. But otherwise, I think we're good to go. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Gillian Bruce.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. So if we've not met before, I'm Gillian Bruce, and Mike's already said some of my story. Just another little recent addition to add that might be of interest is my colleague and I, Laura Leon, we run some adoptee retreats. And we recently decided that as that was becoming more difficult because it's so costly, we've started something called Adoptees in Alliance. And it's a YouTube resource where Laura and I just chat about various aspects of adoption. So that's just another resource for you. If there's more that you fancy having a look at, find us at YouTube, and it's just free. And we just do a little episode every now and then. So that's Adoptees in Alliance on YouTube. So yeah, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to share this information today. This trauma stuff I've been studying it for a long time, and applying it to the adoption experience. So I'm just going to now put some specs on so I can see what I'm doing. Share my screen. Let's do that. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, doke. So I found this picture. Can you believe it? I found this picture on Facebook and I just loved it. Like, it looks as if this stork's just dropped this baby into his parents' arms. And I thought, I've got to use that picture. Because, this is not how we got here, but the world acts as if it is. We dropped out the sky into our adopted parents' arms. But actually, no, we didn't. So that's why I kind of chose that. There we are. So trauma then, first of all. For years and years, there was a belief that adoption was not trauma. Wasn't a problem, easy peasy, not to bother. But in the last 15 years, the understanding of trauma and what that means has grown massively, largely thanks to the work of Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote this fabulous book, The Body Keeps the Score. So that really was a seminal piece of work about trauma operates within the body. So that's what we're talking about. So it's my belief that, many, but not all, let's face it, adoptees experience two types of trauma. There's known now that there's big T trauma. And big T trauma is a single incident, a life-threatening event over which we're powerless. So this might be a car crash, an incident of violence, a terrorist attack, something massive. And this is the kind of thing that we'd be experiencing in a war situation, from which people would get PTSD. And that's the kind of trauma that was understood. What was less understood was the other kind of trauma, and that is small t trauma. So big T trauma, single incident, life-threatening incident. Small t trauma is accumulated trauma. And this will be ongoing incidents, both small and large. So we'll have a think in a minute what kind of thing that would be. So, big T trauma, in the moment of relinquishment for an infant, here we are, we've been with the birth mother for, 9 months. We know the sound of this person's voice. We know their smell. This is my life support system. And the moment of relinquishment represents a life-threatening event to an infant. and it's an event over which we had no control, and it's as if, birth mothers died. So that's kind of how relinquishment works. Small t trauma is the ongoing experience of, certainly for the older adopted generation, the way that the adoption experience was denied. And the way we got messages of, oh, weren't you lucky, chosen, special, and when it didn't feel like that. And adoption's changing now. I suppose I'm talking largely here about my generation that were adopted in the 60s, 70s, into the 80s. But, younger people as well may have some of these experiences, because there'll be still experiences where the many ways that our attunement and connection needs, were not met, frankly, because it was all swept under the carpet. It was that often there was secrecy around adoption. So it was all a bit difficult. And therefore, our trauma was never seen or soothed. So we never felt secure. And Dan Siegel, who's a famous American psychologist, talks about secure attachment comes when the child's difficulties are seen, soothed, so the child feels safe and secure. So when early trauma is not seen or soothed, we don't feel safe and secure. And then we'll have the many ways in which the adoptive family, wider family members, and, society and everybody else treats us, and the other kinds of traumas we all experience as children. We might be bullied at school, we might have various other difficulties, and these accumulate. And that's what we now know, as easy for me to say, CPTSD. So trauma memory works quite differently than regular memories that are rooted in the prefrontal cortex. And what Gabor Mate has recently explained, and you can check out him on YouTube, he talks about childhood trauma isn't just about bad things happening. It's about the good things that didn't happen. The absence of secure attachment, an absence, emotional neglect, issues being brushed under the carpet, emotional deficits, no affection, no sense of security, no felt safety. And even, I don't know about everybody else here, but I never got the message that I would not be given away again. So spent the whole time dreading that I would be given away again. And living with that adrenalized state is, pretty traumatic, actually. It builds up over time. So that's what they now class as CPTSD, is lots of small things that didn't happen, or lots of other experiences people have. There might be violence in the home, there might be domestic abuse, all kinds of things that build up and create this trauma situation. So trauma memory works differently. Trauma memories are stored in the body without language, especially pre-verbal trauma. So if we have trauma when we're babies and we haven't learnt to talk yet, there are no words because we have no words, because we don't understand words yet. So it's really hard to talk about, to know the words, to express what that feels like, because we didn't have language at the time. So we couldn't ascribe words to what was happening to us. Unlike other types of memory that fully engage and can be recalled by the prefrontal cortex, traumatic memory is encoded really differently and involves many areas of the brain, but also in the body as well. So the brain's prefrontal cortex, which is the logic and language area, which is the Broca's area, is inhibited during traumatic experiences. So we might have all had occasions where, something's happened and we've gone into a bit of a freeze response, or we didn't quite know what to say and made some mumbling idiot of ourselves. And later on we go, why didn't I say this? I could have said that. Oh, what was wrong with me? And it's this, that Broca's area goes offline when we have another traumatic experience. Infants' brains have no pre-trauma memory. And so because the brain is built on by experience, they're in the right brain, they're emotionally based. And our first memory is, blimey, you can be given away here, of unsafety, of a life-threatening event. And we have no pre-trauma memory to support us and tell us that it'll all be okay. So there's lots to do about how, this kind of early trauma, which is, let's face it, attachment trauma. This is known now as attachment trauma. So how it works then, the memories of this early pre-verbal attachment trauma, are body symptoms, basically. So unprocessed trauma, kind of modifies the whole nervous system, really. And it also affects other systems in the body, like the digestion, like sleep patterns. I hear a lot of adoptees saying that sleep's tricky. And trauma memories are stored as fragments in multiple areas of the brain and the body. And they're implicit memory and activated through the body via triggers. So it's not so much of a thought response, it's more of a felt in the body sensation response that we're talking about here. So without any concise narrative to provide to other human beings, our traumatic memories kind of are in there and they're visceral, very much in the body, and they can be overwhelming. No matter how intelligent and articulate we are, we may find ourselves in moments where we are stuck, where we can't explain our feelings. We're kind of in a bit of maybe a disassociated freeze response, or we're wrapped up in a fight or flight response, which can be also overwhelming. The limbic system is highly activated during trauma, and there's new research that says, with very early trauma, we're going to have sort of a larger amygdala, a more sensitized amygdala, which is going to set off the alarm and set the whole system into the fight or flight kind of response. So the limbic system's highly activated, but it holds no language. So how on earth do we explain what it's like when that's how it goes? So we haven't got the abilities like the prefrontal cortex. We naturally want to put things into words, but to the shame and the turmoil that's going on with us, or, others expect of us, but we have no words. So that's why pre-verbal early trauma is difficult. So instead, trauma memories are fragmented, body-based, stored in multiple areas, rather than having a nice, clean, narrative through language. So we need to, if we want to feel better and stop being hijacked by this stuff, we need to work on accessing and processing trauma via the body. So that's what we're going to look at. In my counselling training, I had to do a research project, and we looked at, how did people experience trauma in their body? I interviewed about 45 adoptees, and these were the top physical things that were reported in my research. My research was called the biopsychosocial impacts of adoption. And bio meaning biology, the physical stuff, psycho, the psychological, and social, the relational stuff. But the physical stuff, where people were commonly using substances, drink, drugs, cigarettes, and other substances as addiction to comfort and numb. Sleep issues were a lifelong difficulty. People were experiencing fatigue or low energy, particularly as life goes on, and a restlessness, feeling like a caged tiger at times, having to erupt out the house and go and run around the block and of course, that's the flight response, isn't it? Knotted stomach or anxiety stored in the body somewhere else. It might be the tension T-shirt across the top of the shoulders. Digestion and food processing, lots of things like IBS, diarrhea, intolerances to various foods or substances. Relationships with food or food anxiety. That makes sense, doesn't it, if my life support system's taken from me? And lots of skin problems, eczema, psoriasis, flare-ups, picking and itching, because it's all inflammatory stuff, isn't it? And that's what Gabor Mate talks about, that trauma creates, inflammatory responses. So because of all this, talking therapy can only get us so far. So what we know is then that symptoms, body reactions and triggers are actually memories, and they're the way the nervous system responds to those experiences. And if an experience is similar enough, we will be triggered. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. So my example here is, if we have an early wounding, let's say I was terrified as a child because I was yelled at really loudly in a car on a motorway. and those are the ingredients. Loudly yelled at in a car on a motorway. If I'm now in conflict in a car on the motorway, I'm much more likely to be properly triggered and overwhelmed than if I was yelled at somewhere else, because the ingredients are the same. So it doesn't matter what those ingredients are. If the sum of the ingredients and that situation is similar enough, that can be triggering for us. So that explains why sometimes we have a meltdown when we're like, what? And we have to track back. Maybe we don't remember, but there'll be something similar in the system. So we need help, not only with our emotions, but with our somatic experiences. And that's what they call all the body work that's really surging to the fore right now. It's brilliant. This is really being understood now. So healing trauma must be slow, because we're not simply working on the way we think or patterns of behaviour. We're working on the way the body responds, to triggery or difficult situations. So just sort of working with thoughts won't be enough for trauma healing, because we're asking the entire nervous system to make the changes necessary to have felt safety in the body. And that's what we're after, felt safety. That's the goal here. So this was a quote by Antonio Damasio. The core of our self-awareness rests on the physical sensation that convey the inner states of the body. That's what we're after, really getting attuned to what's going on within me, what's happening. And a lot of the stuff that's going on will be so normal, so lifelong, that we might not be even aware of it. There might be tension in the top of the legs, tension in the top of the arms, a bracing in the system that's so familiar, we don't even notice it. So that's our job now, is to start this work. And it's called, if you want the posh word for it, it's called interoception. So perception, proprioception is about what's going on outside of the body. Interoception is about awareness of what's happening internally, inside of the body, sensing physically inside. And our emotions may lack clarity, and sometimes we might not feel our emotions. And this is because often early trauma comes with messages of don't think about it, don't feel, don't speak. Trauma reaction shut down. It is in many families, whether you're adopted or not. Early trauma gives us this message of don't think, don't feel, don't speak. So we're not articulate in knowing what we're even feeling. And Bessel van der Kolk, in this fabulous book, The Body Keeps the Score, describes this as alexithymia. It's not easy to say. But there is a term for this where we know we're feeling something, but we can't name the emotion, we can't name it in words. So actually there's a classification for that. And that's the work we've got to set ourselves, is to really practice what's happening right now, checking in with the body all the time. So I'm going to give you some ideas about how we might do that. So there's kind of a trauma thermometer, and this is about the nervous system, which essentially has two states. So this thermometer here then, when it's hot, when we're activated and we're really in a situation, we're in the red zone, we're at that boiling point, we're overactivated, we're adrenalized. This is likely when we're going to feel like fight or flight. So we might feel like running off. We might literally, the one when you storm out of a room or you need to get out the front door and run around the block, that's the flight response. It's get me out of here. When we're irritated, frustrated, niggly, stroppy, that's low level anger, which is putting us into a low level fight response. Might not physically be, I'm going to punch you, but we start to rev up the fight response. So it's too hot, there's too much feeling, the body's jumpy, the head's buzzy, that's what it's like to be overactivated. We're in the sympathetic nervous system. In the mid zone of the thermometer, surround about that area, it's looking a bit green. That's the just right space. We're calm, we're regulated, we're in a lovely steady state. I'm my normal, happy, regulated self. Heartbeat regular, muscles unclenched. I'm in my normal steady state. But if it starts to get really tricky, we might drop down into the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is when it's too cold. There's not enough feeling now. I've kind of gone into a bit of a freeze or disassociated state. And I'm underactivated. The body's sleepy, the head's empty, I'm blank. And this is when it's really hard to find words. And so we maybe have all experienced all of those at various times. And there's a combination state, which is called functional freeze. And the analogy of this is, imagine being the driver of a car and you've got one foot on the gas and another foot on the brake. So the system's revving, but we're frozen at the same time. So we might find ourselves in those states. So our first job is to kind of get a handle of where am I? Hopefully right now you're in the steady state. But, if there's ever difficult situations, where am I here? Am I overactive? Am I adrenalized? Am I revving? Is it the energy coming up? Or am I, have I come down too far? So the work we have to do, if this is an issue, of course it's not for everybody, but if this is an issue for us, if we feel ourselves to be, adrenalized and in difficult states, basically the work we've got to do is 3 body pieces to develop and build on. So we need to build our ability to sense our level of hot, red arousal and calm the nervous system when it's in the red. So we've got to learn, that the breathing and the other techniques that will calm the system. We've got to expand our ability to be pro-social, which is that steady state, the green state of ventral vagal, which is we're into our pro-social heart-based space. And we engage with harmonious activities with others, we have fun, we get involved with joint projects and activities, and we can be our authentic selves. So that's kind of the goal. We're after steady state as much as possible. And then we need to sort of look at what's happening about being able to activate our system out of the blue zone. But if we're shut down, if we're numbing and frozen, how do we hold our boundaries and how do we express healthy anger? So the practice is to calm it down when it's red and bring it back up if it's gone too flat. So that's some of the work at hand. And to do this, we've really got to have some self-awareness. And it's listening to the body, because actually, generally, it's smarter than you are. If we meet somebody new and they're not for us, the body knows before the brain does. The body's going, I feel anxious around this person, and I'm not even aware of it because my thinking brain's going, oh, he's nice or she's nice. So self-awareness is the starting point if we're going to get somewhere with this work. So self-awareness is the starting point. We need to get familiar with our internal world and understand how our trauma responses operate within us and what they generate in terms of our behaviours. What do I do that comes from a trauma response? Do I slam out of the room? Do I get into fight mode? Do I freeze up and just close down? Do I drop into the fawn response and please others and, work really hard? What's happening in our behaviours that we prefer to do differently? So we know that the typical trauma reactions are fight, flight, which we've probably all heard of. Do I get ratty and irritable and start a fight? Do I storm off or need to go and run? Do I freeze and blank out? Or do I fawn, which means I'm going to work to please? Some new actually responses that have been recognised recently are the attach and cry for help response and the submit and collapse response. These are the ones you get more in, perhaps like a, hostage situation, really dramatic, big situations. Interestingly, new research is telling us that the freeze and fawn response often come together as a 1-2. They often are close coupled. So this is, we might think, oh, I'm people pleasing again. But actually what it is that the fawn response is a survival response. And imagine this situation, you work in a bank. And here comes the, masked gunman now with the gun, give me all the money. The first thing we probably do is freeze, because I can't run or I can't fight him. So we're going to freeze. And then probably with the next breath, we'd go, certainly, sir, how would you like the money? I've got this nice bag. Would you like that? We'll go into the fawn response. So freeze and fawn often come together as a 1-2, so don't be surprised if you find that happening. So we need to make sure that we know about all these things so that we can stay regulated. We know that feeling adrenalized or blank and it might even be so shut down that it can feel like our normal. So we don't even notice. I know still that if things feel difficult, I'm aware, but I'm zoned out. It will go a bit blank and there won't be many words coming out. And I'm clocking it, but I'm checking back out, and there'll be degrees of that. We might just check out and feel a bit blank, or we might completely freeze, or we might disassociate completely. So there's levels of that. But it's just knowing what our body does. So the classic trauma responses then that will trigger us, am I angry or in the fight response? What am I? Is this normal, regular anger, or is it a trigger? Is that anger too hot? Is it too much? Is it beyond the bounds of this situation? Is it unrealistic? Is it beyond what's required here? So how do we know if I'm just angry or if I'm in the fight response? That's how. If it's unrealistic, if it's beyond the bounds of the realistic. Am I in the flight response? Do I feel the need to go and run? Am I frozen like the deer in the headlights? Or am I being this puppy here and doing the fawn, and trying to please? So, it'll look the same. Someone else might think, oh, she's just thinking about it. Am I thinking about it or am I frozen? And we need to cultivate the difference so we get familiar, with what's happening here. What's a normal response and what's a trigger response? So let's click again. Here we go. So the awareness of the body and the emotions in the red zone. So if it's up, if I'm at the top of that thermometer, I'm adrenalized, I'm revved up, it's too activated, that's when we might feel the need to move, to be in the go, 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 or do zone. Do have you ever had that where you're revved up and you might need to go and just get energized and you might go and frantically clear out a cupboard or do something, or burn off some adrenaline by going for a run or a good walk or burst off to the gym? That might be the need to burn off some adrenalized state. We may notice that our muscles are tense or engaged in the arms and shoulders. I've even worked with people as they're describing it and their hands are actually doing this, getting into fist mode. So, whenever we get tension in these arms here, top of the arms, top of the legs, that's with ramping up into the fight response. Mildly, we're not actually going to punch somebody. Or we might notice our legs are lively, fidgety or tense. So they're getting ready to flight. So it's subtle, but you can notice it. I know if I've ever, when you have a near miss in the car, you might suddenly, whoa, and suddenly all the adrenaline's here in these arms because you've been triggered into this is fight or fight mode. We might notice that we feel pent up, a bit impatient by the slowness in others. We might get really irritable or stressy, and that might be that we're just ramping up into these states. We might notice we feel energized and be in need of a challenge or something new or something edgy. Quite often we like things that are a bit edgy, a bit challenging. We may be drawn to others that feel edgy or projects or activities that feel a bit risky or adrenalizing, but we go for it anyway. So in my experience, a lot of adoptees are really good at feeling the fear and doing it anyway, because it's adrenalizing. Because our normal state is adrenalized anyway, often. Not everybody, but, for a lot of adoptees, adrenalized is a bit of a normal state. So it's calming that down so we can exist in that lovely green zone. The stomach might be clenched in tension or other areas where we hold tension, such as the shoulders here, the jawline, often there's clenched teeth, arms and legs, hands and feet, we might be clawing on the floor. So our job is noticing all of this and noticing, actually, this isn't how I want to be. This is exhausting, this stuff here. This is absolutely exhausting and will lead to fatigue in the long run. We can't exist forever like that. It's really not good for us. So the other option is the other way, if I'm under aroused, if I'm in that blank, freezy, disassociating kind of state. How do we know? Well, we might notice that the mind feels blank. We notice that we don't feel anything. We might notice that we might not feel able to speak. or just do a sort of silly agreement. We may feel numb, checked out, disassociated, shut down, very still or sleepy, or we might mistake that for depression. Indeed, it might go with depression. We may take a while to come out of this freeze state and be able to process events more clearly later, but we can't really respond particularly brilliantly from that state. So what are we going to do about that? So I'm going to share now some ideas of what do we do then when we're in these states? How do we do it? How do we come back to steady state? You know, that lovely green zone in the middle. So to bring down over arousal, when it's ramped up, when we're slightly fighty flighty, you know, we do a bit of interoception. We notice, we go, okay, yeah, we're a bit adrenalized here. We're a bit pent up, bit revved. We release that by, actually, it's a great idea to burn off the adrenaline with some exercise. Walk, run, lift weights. If that's not available, run up and down the stairs, you know, and just burn off some of that excess energy. But these are some really nice little techniques. We could do a whole body shake, literally stand and absolutely shake it out, really shake the limbs as much as you possibly can. We can engage in practices like tapping, which is the EFT technique. So we can be tapping along the collarbone and humming at the same time. Humming or any vibrational noise in the jawline stimulates the vagus nerve, which puts us back into a steady state. So we might want to practice that, just tapping, deep humming, you know, a sort of deep sound. The foghorn noise is really good. Like, you know, anything that's going to make a vibration here goes down into the vagus nerve, calms the system. Another one, if you're getting into anger, is to practice a wood chop. So we literally pretend we're holding an axe and go, you know, all the way down to the floor and get some of frustration out like that. Another nice technique, if you're frustrated with somebody else and you want to manage your responses, get something like a towel and wring its neck out like that and make the noise, you know, get it out. It doesn't want to be in the system. We don't want this energy in the body. So those are just a few little techniques to try. Another resource that I personally use a lot, and I also do the squeeze the towel and the tap and hum, is TRE. That stands for trauma and tension releasing exercises. TRE, it's a thing. It's a practice where you work in the lower body, you work with the area below the diaphragm, and it's a shaking activity, but it releases tension through the psoas muscle, which begins with a P. It's a silent P, psoas muscle. And you can find more about that on traumaprevention.com. And there's a whole piece about how it was discovered and how we hold tension below the abdomen. And that's a really nice shaking technique. But some of these, you know, you can actually do if you just nip to the bathroom. You know, you can soon do a bit of a tap and hum. You can soon do a nice little shake or squeeze something, you know, squeeze your coat or something if you need to burn off some of that pent up energy. And, you know, we are animals, let's face it. We can cry, yell, growl. You know, all animals have these responses, don't they? You know, think about a dog. You know, it doesn't go straight to bite. You know, it might go to a little, you know, and then there'll be a growl, then there'll be a bark, then there'll be the bite. You know, and that's how we operate too. So let some out with some sound if we can. Focus on a physical task. Get into the body. Do you know what's this sounds nuts, but a lovely soothing thing to is to fold laundry or fold things, fold clothes, fold tea towels, folding is something they do. They get old folks in old people's homes doing that to calm them down. Just any rhythmic, you know, nice little physical activity is really helpful. And question internally, what am I reacting to and why? Is this here and now stuff? Or could this be old stuff? You know, and a great question to ask ourselves when we're in these states is to ask, how old do I feel right now? I know when I'm angry, you know, and pent up and I might feel like might feel like doing this to people. I think, how old do I feel right now? Oh, I feel like my 17-year-old self. You know, then that's a younger self driving the bus. That's an old trigger. So to calm down, there's lots on offer, breath work, yoga, qigong. We can orient in time and space, where we literally just sit and go, okay, I'm here right now. I'm in my little living room. I've got these walls around me. It's midday. All is well, so we can come down. We can connect with the kidney and the adrenal interface by rubbing our hands to get some warmth going and placing them, in the back, round about your waistband area, and just sending some warmth into that adrenal space to bring some calm there. That's kind of really nice. I do that one as well. I've tried all of these things. Then there's the self hug. If we need self-soothing, you take your right arm and you tuck it under your left armpit, and that way you've got some arm over your heart, and you take your left arm and you put that over that shoulder. Because the brain just notices, I'm being hugged here. It doesn't matter that it's you. The response is the same. So the self-hug is lovely. And with the self-massage as well, we can really bring some calm and settle the system a bit. Vibrating sounds, I've said, to settle the vagus nerve. And the sound that's really good is this voo-ah. Voo-ah. That sound really does get the vibration going and will, ooh. Another thing you can just do is really simply tell the nervous system you're safe. If I'm ever anxious, which I am frequently, I will just say, honey, this is not a life-threatening event. You're safe. It's a bit exciting, you're doing a presentation today. It's a bit exciting, but it's not life-threatening. We're all right. We're safe. Just hearing your own voice say that is pretty good. The other way then, if we want to bring our energy up, we're talking about bringing it back up again. So bring back feeling. We can stamp, wiggle the toes, rub the hands, do a bit of a, side to sidey thing, move your back and your shoulders, try backwards and forwards circles. Again, orient in space and time. I'm here, it's lunchtime, I'm in my room, This is a nice one. I really do a lot. Swing, stretch, doing a twist, rubbing the heart, the chest area, energize the system, to come back to life. Bring logic back via arithmetic because it's a left brain activity. So you can set yourself some little sums, 7 times 15. Oh, hang on a minute. Because that takes us out of the emotional brain into the left brain, the logic side. A nice little one that you can do with others around and they won't even know is sing softly or hum again, just activating the voice box. Engage with others to return to the ventral vagal state, that pro-social, I can interact again. And we might need to connect with some healthy anger because often if we've frozen, we will be angry later. Somebody made me freeze, or triggered a freeze. So we might have to connect with, okay, what am I angry about here? And identify what triggered the freeze in the nervous system. What was this similar enough to that triggered this? So triggers of over and under arousal, triggers will be individual. We have to build our own awareness. What were the situations? I've worked with clients where a parent was very unreliable, would say they were coming to collect them and then didn't turn up. So anybody being unreliable in present life creates a triggered response. So it's just what was happening then that's happening again. Develop awareness of our own sources of over-arousal, anxiety, pent-up feelings. When am I angry? When do I get critical, judgy? And that can mask deep feelings of hurt and pain as well, because we put it out there. We externalize it rather than letting it be in here. What irritates, what frustrates, what puts tension in my body? When do I feel bored? And that can be a bit of a panicky situation and get a need to get things going, need to do something. That can often be a bit of a state. Notice what you're thinking and feeling and doing. What am I doing here? If I'm slamming around the house, slamming doors and chucking books down, what am I doing? If I'm speeding around the house, or walking really quickly, what's happening? If I'm fidgeting or zoning out or I'm super still, what's going on? So these are all things to pay attention to and develop awareness of what puts us into the freeze and shutdown state. Or you might not do that. You might go the other way. You know, what puts you into the fear state and what situations are similar enough to events from earlier life that will set the system off. Yeah. So these are all hours to notice. So potential triggers for adopted adults then, and I'm aware I'm just running a wee bit over, so I'll do this reasonably quickly. Build awareness, because in 1982, some researchers called Silverstein and Kaplan, and you can Google that, the 1982 Lifelong Impacts of Adoption research identified that adoptees will have lifelong impacts of loss. So any potential future loss or threat of loss is likely to be triggering. Grief stored in the system, running in the background, that may arise around any other grief. We might lose a pet, you know, and be utterly devastated, you know, because we've got also with building on the grief in the system. Rejection, there might be a heightened sensitivity to rejection. So anything that might lead to rejection, like criticism or negative feedback or not being included, will perhaps be a heightened state of triggering. Any guilt or shame, depending on the message of adoption we internalised. What did I make of the message that you adopted? Identity issues, feeling that we don't belong, not knowing our history when we go to the doctors, you know, we don't know the medical information, that can feel triggering. And, you know, intimacy might be tricky. You know, hypervigilance as intimate connections can feel risky. So relationships might be really difficult. Also feeling out of control. If we feel out of control or we don't have a say or haven't got mastery or I'm restricted, that can be triggering too. So there's some clues just to go off, because this is, you know, the lifelong impacts of adoption. So just to work with the body again, let's look after our body in other ways. Depressing foods can calm overactivation. It doesn't mean they're going to make us depressed. It means they depress the nervous system. So they bring it down. So these include dense, heavy, rich foods like fried foods, dairy-rich foods, so creamy, cheesy pasta, you know, or a baked potato with lots of cheesy beans. We reach for those for a reason, because they calm. That's why they're called comfort foods. Balancing foods that, you know, don't bring up the nervous system or help repair slowly. Best things are whole foods, green veg and beans. So if you've got a sort of anxiety situation going on, that's what you want to eat. Water and herbal tea, that's it. Yeah. So green veg, beans, pulses, all those kind of foods allow us to manage stressors really well. And we need to avoid, of course, the stimulating foods, which are the caffeine, the sugars. So if we want to manage it a bit more physically as well, that's where to put some attention. So lastly, here we go, we're pretty much on time. Which situations are similar enough for you to old situations that trigger? What responses from others make you freeze or shut down and go blue? What situations get you over-aroused and into the red zone? And which situations allow you to be in that lovely steady state, that green zone, where actually it all feels calm and I can think straight and be super smart and articulate and my best self? So that's the work of the adoptee. For how do I work with the trauma that might be in my body? Not for all of us, you know, some of you might don't recognize any of this. But for those that do, you know, there's stuff we can do. And hopefully we're giving you some ideas there with ways to bring energy up and ways to bring energy back down. So that concludes the trauma and the body presentation. I hope that's been at least interesting and helpful.
Gilly, that was totally amazing. Thank you very much. There's such a lot of positive comment going on in the chat, and I think that's really resonated with lots of people, and they're all sending lots of love and claps through the Zoom system.
Good.
Yeah, so no, just brilliant, and really clearly put across in a way that I think you know, we could relate to whatever our sort of previous experience of all this kind of stuff is. So well done, that was fantastic. Just a couple of things there was quite a bit of really useful recommendation in the chat of other people to look up. But there was a couple of points I just wanted to pick up on people were asking. One was about CPTSD.
Yep.
And they said that they were told they couldn't have it as they weren't having nightmares or flashbacks.
Of course they were. And, this is because largely, people are not trauma informed. Watch Gabor Mate, he'll tell you.
Yes.
Dr. Gabor Mate, who was himself abandoned as a baby. He's really done lots on attachment trauma. So have a check him out on YouTube. He'll tell you.
Yeah, I think in the chat people were recommending him and Paul Sunderland and others.
Yes.
Oh, the lights have just gone off, so I'll ask the question and go and switch the lights on back on in my room. The other one, there was a bit of chat about the similarity to ADHD symptoms, and
Yes.
I just wondered what your thoughts were about the connection between the two. Just going to switch my lights back on.
It's not something I have knowledge about. I've heard this. I've heard talk of this, and other colleagues that are researching that. I think they're looking for connections to it. I personally don't have that information at this time, but I know there are people looking into that. The early trauma will have ADHD consequences. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And question just popped up. How do we access this type of body therapy for a 15-year-old?
Well, I guess I would start with, Qigong, yoga. I'd start to get into those. There are quite a lot of body therapists out there now. There's one of our gang, Tanya, she's just qualified as a therapeutic yoga teacher. So have a Google, therapeutic yoga, just anything that gets the body moving, and check out TRE.
People are suggesting trauma somatic therapies in the chat.
Exactly.
And that kind of thing. So have a look at those. And obviously, if they're adopted, if they're of that age, they can potentially get support through the Adoption and Special Guardianship Support Fund. Whether or not you could get that therapy is another matter. Yeah. Okay, I think I'm going to draw that to a close because we said we'd finish a few moments ago. Gilly, that was absolutely amazing. Now, this presentation will be on the PAC-UK YouTube channel. Our aim is to get that up later today, so hopefully very soon. So you can view it again there, guide your colleagues, friends, fellow adoptees, whatever it is towards that. That would be just great. Lots of big thanks going to you in the chat and everything, Gilly.
Thank you, everybody. I'm glad it was helpful.
Totally. Thank you so much. I think that's been absolutely brilliant. So thanks for joining us, everybody. And yes, have a good rest of day. Thanks again, Gilly. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.